How Black the Sky by T.J. Marquis. Cash had always thought he'd spend more time on his throne, being fed blackberries or spitberries by Gen women with gleaming skin like crushed quartz. His female attendants would have their own beautiful servants, who would stand by waving their paper fans at him to dispel a bit of the Underland's dank humidity. If he slept, they would drape him in rich, plush blankets and make sure his head didn't droop. If he desired entertainment, they would dramatise the myths of old for him, or dance, or bring in jesters from faraway lands. It turned out that ruling the Underlands was not always so glamorous. Women, and Gen women in particular, were not in fact keen to line up at the palace doors each day, gleefully awaiting their chance to serve a mighty master. Underlings of all kinds were more concerned with preserving their own hides than protecting or nourishing their ruler. Getting them to take on all the vast array of infrastructure projects Cash had dreamed up in his youth was not as simple as giving an order. He had to have a plan for the treasurer, a hierarchy for the workers, instructions for the foremen, and compensation for everyone from menial labourers on up. Slavery was not an option, for every underlord who had ever attempted to gather slaves had been tossed ruthlessly into the chasms. Cash found that he had to be diligent, organised, and conscientious. He had to give thought to the goals and emotions of his people. They responded more to this than to any threat of harm, for they knew that the people of the Underlands were its true soul and body, not the Underlord himself. Their ruler was to be a facilitator, a benefactor, often a servant. In his early years, Cash had found these revelations hard to swallow. He was powerful, of good breeding, and his family was of high standing. He simply hadn't realised that leadership was hard work. Yet, he fell into it easily. After all, conquering the land itself had been no simple task either. He was confident in his ability to adapt, to learn, and to succeed. Now his people loved him, his workmen and soldiers respected him, and all of Underland was united to rise and claim Overland for themselves. Cash had just folded back down to his palace from the risen Testadel. Experience had taught him the importance of rest. The fortress would be safe enough without him. Besides, if Gorgonbane returned to attack sooner than he expected, with a greater force or without, Agrata would fold down and let him know. He didn't think it would come to that. Even those mighty warriors would hesitate to take him head on, in his own fortress, no less. They'd slain many of his legions, but crossed swords with him only once. Cash took pride in knowing that he'd been the one to walk away without a limp. He grinned. Overland had no idea what had just begun. Cash didn't even care about the loss of several monstrosities or the half-battalion of werewolves. All of the Underlands were at the ready to claim this surface world, and Overland would never be able to unite in defense. Cash laughed. Even if they wanted to unite, no one up there knew which city he would attack next. Where would they convene? Cash strolled through his austere throne room to the balcony outside. It overlooked the fields arrayed around the palace, and the wall far beyond. Gen were hard at work below, tending the blackberry groves and the bloodhoofs out in their pasture. Yes, it was better to be down here for now. Maybe even after the conquest was complete. There was something comforting about the dark, distant vault of the sky that the silver moon endlessly circled. It was to him as a blanket to a young child, and Cash felt no guilt at recognising this. He supposed it was ingrained in his flesh. From time immemorial, those born in the Underlands had harboured a natural aversion to the surface world, sometimes even a fear of it. He still didn't know what long-lost condition had caused the aversion, but clearly it no longer existed. Overland was now no more dangerous to an Underlander than the realm of Subterra. Again, it was simply less comfortable. Not that this rendered it less desirable for conquest. A bloodhoof herdsman caught sight of Cash on his high balcony and waved. Cash waved back. He called out to one of his footmen who waited just inside the balcony doors. The servant obediently stepped outside. "Have a sumptuous dinner sent that man's family, Jorgra," he said to the footman. "Serve it on silver dishes with a crystal carafe of glimmermead for each adult in the household. Insist that they keep the dishes when the meal is done. If they inquire as to why I have sent it, tell them you do not know." Jorgra nodded and trotted off to see to the dinner. Cash was not always so extravagant with his rewards, especially for something so trivial as a friendly wave. But today was a special day. Even in the unlikely event that the Underlord's plan failed, and he seriously doubted this, today would be written in history as the day that the Underlands asserted their dominance over the world. It was the day that the seat of overlandish knowledge, scholarship and religion had been wiped from existence. And though he hadn't planned it, it had been the day that Cash had bested Gorgonbane a second time, a feat which no other living mortal held claim to. Cash smiled in satisfaction, then checked himself. He shook his head slowly. He should not linger on such emotions. If he began to feel secure, fulfilled, he might become mired in contentment. He might decide that 1 or 2 cities were enough, might begin to feel that the Overlanders deserved to keep some of what had been theirs. It was a strange sense of fairness that sometimes crept into his thoughts, and he had to banish it, along with any hint of complacency. No. This victory must be total. Whichever Overlanders survived to live under his rule would come to love and respect him as the Underlanders did. They would learn to till their fields and pluck from their vines as if he were always watching, and they would send tribute in the hopes of gaining his favour. He would bless them with dinners and livestock and even enchantments, and they would love him. The world may even enjoy a time of peace. The faint sound of reality ripping apart came from the throne room behind him, and Cash started. He hadn't expected anything to go wrong so soon. He turned and left the balcony tense. "Agrata," he said, "what happened? Are you okay?" He strode up to his wife and placed his hands on her slim shoulders. She looked whole. Her jet-black skin reflecting glimmers of lamplight. She smiled. "All is well, my darling," she said. "Too well for the taste of some of your minions," she chuckled. "Then why have you come? I did not expect you so soon, and you worried me," he said. "I simply wish to spend a night with you," she said, slipping her slender arms around his waist, laying her head on his wide chest. "Don't worry, I left a decoy of light with an enchantment of seeing. If there is any substantial movement outside Testadel, I will know." Cash released his tension. He did prefer to have warm bodies in place rather than spells, for spells could be broken or falsely triggered. He could not refuse Agrata, however, and she knew this. She was worth more to him than 1,000 mistresses, perhaps even more than his rule of the Underlands, or the notion of conquest. "Yes, love," she said as he relaxed. It was a good day, but even you must rest. Think not of it as being a slackguard. How well she knew him. It is an investment in tomorrow's performance, its efficacy. She was right, of course. He was mighty but mortal. Deep sleep and the love of his wife would help him to ensure he met the next day with alertness, with verve, with wisdom. You tell me to rest, he said, reaching around to the small of her back. Yet you quicken my blood with your touch and scent, she smiled coyly. Come, let us retire a little early then. We can sneak down to the kitchens for a late snack when the cooks have gone to bed. She laughed at the childish notion, but said, You will need more than a snack, darling. Ha! He boomed. Prime me for a feast then, my beauty. Cash swept her up into his arms and began to carry her toward their chambers, which was secreted down a number of halls beyond the throne room. Yes, Agrata was right. This was the perfect way to end a very good day. Is there anything we should be looking for on the way? Pierce asked Sev as they travelled the old road. Materials for your enchantment? Sev shrugged. Oh, need a good bit of silicone, but that should be easy to come by, no? Pierce gave him a blank look. If you get me a quiet space, I can synthesize the crystals I need to distill the blue enchantment, Sev said. He put a thick finger to his lips. Your wizard friend will probably need more than a bottle of dust to do the job, so he'll have to find me a place to store it all. You'll have to ask S about silicon, said Pierce. I wouldn't know where on earth to find it, but I won't mind doing the legwork. The tiny army rode south, making for the edge of Overland. S had said there would be road most of the way there. They wouldn't have to travel over open country until passing through a town called Shiv. From there it would be a march of a few more days before they reached Chasmgard, the first's grand tower. Everyone was on edge and trying not to show it. They might meet anything along the way. Towns that would have once been pleasant way stops on a journey might now be hives of evil. There could be roving bands of troops or monsters from the Underlands, fanning out from any number of camps or fortresses. There was no way to know what to expect before it was upon them. Pierce had settled into the rhythm of travel and was watching the red sun crawl westward when S floated up alongside him. Hey S, he said casually. It took all his might to stay calm. Even through all those robes he could feel her nearness, and it quickened his blood. Pierce, she greeted. She said nothing more for quite a while, and Pierce began to fidget. A smile crept onto S's lips. Do I really make you that uncomfortable? She asked playfully. Yes, no, Mom. No, not uncomfortable, no. It's just I had a lot of girl cousins, so it's not that I'm not used to girls or to women. S laughed. But you're different, Pierce said. Am I? S glanced over at him. How so? Pierce knew she was playing with him, but this felt more like a sparring match. Would he say the right thing? Was it possible to do so? He could skirt the matter or drive in for a direct strike. Well, I've never seen a Gen woman up close, for one, he said. Supra Gen, to be precise, she corrected. Normal Gen are grey of skin. Does my race confuse your sense of attraction? Pierce felt the hit. He'd skirted, staying out of range, but she'd leapt in for a direct strike. If he disengaged, it could be all over. He went bold. No, S, You're beautiful, I'm sure you know that. Her eyes widened in surprise and her smile grew. Why, thank you, Pierce. It's true, I've never seen anyone like you. Well, if the only girls you know are your cousins, said S, I should think not. Pierce laughed. That's not what I meant. Where are they? Your family? S asked. Pierce's spirit dampened a little and he forgot about flirting. Down in the Underlands, actually, he said. Really? S mused. Defectors to Subterra are not common. Yeah, well, we lived out in West Conter. On the border of Alba, yes? S said. I know it. Apparently after the wars, our Duke went a little mad. Around the time I was born, he started taxing the farmers like crazy. When I'd grown, Dad finally had enough. Said he'd heard things were better for people down below, and the whole clan packed up to leave. And you wouldn't go? Pierce shook his head. Never. If I can't sit still for a tutor, how am I supposed to survive as a subject of the Underlord? They do say Cash has a fair hand, S said. But I understand. Were they angry with you? Disowned me, Pierce said. Dad wanted my help setting up a farm. Thought we'd raise Raptorians. I refused to go. So he said he never wanted to see me again. Mum and Gauntlet didn't agree, of course, but it's hard to go against Father. I'm sorry, Pierce, S said. Thanks, S, but it's okay. I have to stick to what I believe is right, don't I? I find that is often the best course of action. Pierce often wondered if he were destined for the glorious paths. He really hadn't studied very studiously. Did his natural sense of justice match the teachings of his professed religion? He tried to imagine precisely what S believed. With all her vast knowledge, she seemed to be in favour of saving the people of Overland at any rate, so that was a good sign. What do you believe is right? S asked. To sharpen my blade, he said immediately. To find my place in Overland and bring justice where it's needed. Noble, to be sure. Isn't that what Gorgonbane's about? Pierce asked. From the tales it always sounded that way. It became that in time, S said. But I must confess at the start, the five of us did seek glory and riches. We wanted to be lords and ladies of Overland. Wait, 5? Pierce said, puzzled. Tales of Flayla are not easy to come by, said S, for she was not with us long. Would you like to hear one? Dearly, said Pierce. He watched S speak with rapt attention. Flayla of Chasm was as strong as she was beautiful. She did not share the yellow eyes of her sister, but instead greeted the world with a gaze of bright green. Scythia's sister? Pierce asked. Yes. Besides this, you would be hard-pressed to tell them apart from a distance, though Flayla was the younger. She had struck out for Grondel and Arena a year after Scythia's departure from home, following in her sister's footsteps. It was at Arena during a tournament in which Flayla had prevailed resoundingly that we found both her and Scythia in the first place. Axborn and Agrathor were both taken with them immediately. Back when he had skin. Back when Agrathor was enfleshed, and Axborn was a little prettier, yes. Besides my comrade's attractions, I saw great reason to recruit the two. Of course you know of Scythia's aptitude in gemcraft. But Flayla was a master of all weapons. She could do things with them that you wouldn't believe, though she had little magic in her. Naturally, the boys were quick to take up my nomination of the two, and the girls were pleased to accept. We departed Arena to look for work, which we found in Conta, actually. An archduke whose name I cannot remember hired us to train his men and bolster the Aegean defences against an expected siege by the Albans. I know, Pierce said, grinning at having remembered an old lesson. He used to rule Aegia before his own subjects beheaded him during the Alban Wars. Very good, my pupil, S laughed. So you see that Gorgonbay did not always serve justice unswervingly. And you hadn't even been given a name yet. I was just telling Sev about the Gorgon Plague. S shook her head. Dark times indeed. So we did the job, training Iron Oak's men for a full 2 years before the siege finally came. In that time, Scythia and Axborn's love had grown and promised to flower. We all knew they would be married at the earliest opportunity. Agrathor likewise had fallen into Flayla's arms. Pierce could already see the implications of this. I remember doing my katas under the light of the moon and looking up to see the two of them on the ramparts, seemingly sleepless, keeping watch and talking about everything under the sun. You could see the green of Flayla's eyes from 100 yards away, and Agrathor had the most winsome smile. S looked up suddenly toward the rest of Gorgonbane riding ahead of them. She squinted ever so slightly, and Pierce watched the tiny rise of her cheek. She wore a faint smile as if remembering the Agrathor of old. Sometimes I think that if I could go back to those days, I would. This passion for my craft can be such a burden, S said, and was silent for a long time. Pierce thought about Gorgonbane before their name had even been imagined, and he did not fidget as he waited. S continued at last. An Alban general named Bellows was the one that finally challenged the city of Aegia. He led 5 battalions of mounted knights clad in the best armour the Alban forges could produce. Yet he claimed that he wished to cause the city no great distress, and was very forthcoming with the notion that he desired possession of the city, but in one piece. He offered up a deal, a contest of champions. If his champion won, we would relinquish control of the city. If our champion prevailed, the Alban army would hold their camp at peace for 30 days, then repeat the challenge, promising not to hinder the coming and going of the Aegeans. We never got to learn whether he was a man of his word. Naturally, we chose Flayla as our champion. After all, she had bested every warrior in Overland's arena. Who better to represent us? Oh no, said Pierce. She didn't win. S gave a sly smile. Have I said that? The sun was bright and pulsing that day, and you could see the heat rising from the rocky flats outside the Aegean ramparts. Our longbowmen lined the top of the walls, watching for treachery. Flayla met the Alban champion in the field, taking with her a single squire loaded with weapons. The Alban champion was another Westerling, a very large man, entirely encased in shining armour. Whenever he bellowed, the sound carried the muted resonance of his stylish helm. But Flayla did not flinch before his taunts and simple insults. She merely waited, and asked his choice of weapon. In an amusing coincidence, he chose Flayla's namesake. It wasn't his final mistake, but it would number among the last of them. I'll never forget the match, however short it was. Flayla chose her flail and provided the Alban with one. His squire inspected it and found it acceptable. They squared off against each other, and General Bellows signalled for them to begin. Flayla let the Alban test the weight and balance of his weapon, let him show off what skill he thought he had. Her only taunt was to beckon him nearer. He laughed and flicked out the spiked end of the flail as if to tease her. It was during one of these foolish taunts that she caught his chain in hers and pulled him close. Flayla planted a fist in the man's faceplate, denting it inward with an audible crunch. I would swear the woman was made of iron. She let the Alban fall back, disentangling the chains of the flails. He was forced to retract the faceplate, and his nose bled profusely. Agrathor laughed at him from my side. I couldn't see his eyes from the ramparts, but the Alban's tense bearing said he now knew this fight was no joke. There were no more flashy maneuvers of his flail. Flayla and the Alban traded a number of feints and strikes, though I believe she could have ended him any second. She blocked an overhead swing, then flicked the spiked ball down low and into the Alban's greaves. So great was her strength that the metal caved inward. The Alban began to limp. He circled Flayla, slyly trying to get in range of his squire. I saw the squire ready a spear inconspicuously, but so did Flayla. When the Alban spun away from her to accept the spear, dishonourably I might add, Flayla flung her weapon at him, spiked ball tumbling end over end. The handle of the flail struck the Alban's helm in just the right place, and the chain curled around the curve of his skull. The spiked ball lodged in his face, and he fell to the ground, dead. Pierce imagined it, an impressive feat to behold. The battlefield was shocked, and our men cheered, a deafening roar. General Bellows ordered his men to fall back, and they obeyed, with many an irate glance back toward the city. So he was a man of his word, Pierce said. He did what he'd said. For the afternoon, yes, S said. It was the night time that brought us treachery. We had been furnished with little apartments in an annex to the barracks. Agrathor was asleep in his room and never forgave himself for not standing watch. It wasn't something we had been in the habit of doing, so why would he this night? Sometime in the deepest hours of the night, a spy or mage must have gained access to Flayla's room. In a most heinous and disgusting display of dishonour, they poured a powerful poison down Flayla's throat. It probably took effect within seconds. She would have foamed at the mouth, convulsing, waking from a well-deserved slumber to the horror of her own murder. By the time the sun had crawled up out of the east, she had been dead for hours. S went quiet again, looking up toward Agrathor, further down the road. Agrathor had long since learned to harness the lightning in his soul, but his rage and mourning brewed up a storm that he could not contain. The Alban battalions were slain before the smells of breakfast had even begun to waft out of the kitchens, and the siege was ended, just like that. I would have counselled them to take General Bellows prisoner at least, but Agrathor electrocuted every last one of the besiegers with no regard to station. He doesn't talk about Flayla, Pierce said. Too much pain, I guess. He does not often talk about losing his flesh either, S pointed out, even though he will not admit it. So Scythia took up the flail, Pierce realised. The very one that her sister used to slay the Alban champion. It is her memorial, enchanted against decay. And that was your first mission together, Pierce said. It was a wonder they had kept their wits after such a devastating loss. Of course, we did odd jobs in the years leading up to the siege, said S. But yes, officially this was our first big job, and the beginning of a real sense of honour among us. If that was how the world treated such a diligent and talented champion, we had to be better. We resolved to be the best version of ourselves that day. Pierce glanced up at the sun, feeling the heat of that cursed day outside the city of Idja. Not just Agrathor's, but Scythia's heart had been cut out. It was one thing to be disowned by family. At least Pierce knew they were alive and safe. Lost to treachery, poison, of all things, and to death. He could only imagine the devastation. Belatedly, Pierce realised his sparring with S had ended with the mention of his family and the telling of Flayla's tale. Had she thought to dampen his spirits on purpose? Or had it been a natural course of conversation? He was preparing himself to re-engage when Scythia called back to S from up ahead. She glanced down at him with a smile and floated off toward the others. Next time, Pierce thought. S caught up to Scythia, Flayla's tale still playing in her head. All those years ago and now so fresh in mind, the memory was a wondrous thing. S, we ask a favour of you, Scythia said. It was peculiar, almost eerie, how the woman's eyes recalled her sister. A dash of blue upon that yellow and do not dampen the brightness, and they would be Flayla's own emeralds. What can I do? S said. Axborn asks if you'll fold back to Siffer. He wants to make sure the town's been warned and that Sugar has an evacuation plan for her family. Axborn looked at her expectantly. I can do that, said S. And Agrathor wants you to warn Death Grips while you're at it. Agrathor turned away. S thought he'd be blushing if he had skin. S smiled. I can do that too. Shall I bear a flower he has picked just for her? Agrathor made his growling sound and S chuckled. Do not fret, old friend, she said. I merely jest. Anything else? Blacksmith forge you well, said Scythia. Stay tempered, S replied. She focused inward, felt the pull to the north, and collapsed into an endless tunnel. Here, the world was dark. In the space between spaces, there was no red crawling sun, nor a sliding silver moon. S had never known where the light to see came from, but see she could. There was a surreal representation of Overland stretching before and behind her. Below, at a distance, lay the Underlands. She could see all the way to the Chasm, and just a little beyond. Above lay only blackness. How surprised the common person would be at how much coming and going there really was in this ethereal realm. Only with mastery did this vision come. S saw Cash's green light as he travelled from Testadel to his palace. Amber streaks of displaced Grondolite mages arced over the continent as they no doubt went about warning various peoples of the coming trouble. Clouds of banshee swirled over the depthless chasm. Over and through it all, cryptic intention signals crisscrossed the void. Thousands of gleaming threads like spider silk, some merely stretched from one house to another, Others were strung between towns or cities. Many strained upward in search of the glorious paths. From Cash's peculiar aura, they spread like roots, reaching in every direction. S knew that she would have to address his ambition shortly. S emerged from her tunnel onto the hard-packed road in front of Sugar's tavern. She had seen from a distance that no trouble had yet fallen upon Cipher, so she knew it was safe to fold out there. A few passers-by jolted in surprise at her sudden appearance, and S held up empty hands to set them at ease. They all scurried away anyhow, clutching travel bags and possessions hastily wrapped up in blankets. There was none of the usual ruckus emanating from Sugar's tavern. S entered the open door and could hear Sugar rooting around back in the kitchen. "Sugar," she called out. "It is S." The noises stopped and Sugar emerged, brushing dust off her apron with one hand. In the other, she held a very long ladle. "Nuisance," she grumbled. "Nothing but a waste of cliff-licking time." "I beg your pardon," said S, smirking. "I shall return the way I came." "Oh, pah," Sugar spat. "Not you, wizard woman, the invasion!" "I can see that word has reached you already. Your brother sent me to make sure of the fact." Yes, we've heard," said Sugar. Her brilliant red hair in all its great volume belied the gravity of her tone. "Holy mages that escaped Grondel came, folded in and out, just enough information to ruin our week. I doubt Cash will even bother with Cipher, but I guess there's no sense in taking chances." Sugar had moved behind the bar. She fetched a large stein and began to fill it from a tap. She handed the product to S, who knew better than to refuse. She sipped at it gingerly, and Sugar's cheeks grew red, even as she poured a drink for herself. "Come on, woman, it's likely the end of Overland. This is no time for the dainty sips of a princess. Drink up." There was no denying the woman. S took a stool, downed her mead in time with Sugar, and felt its pleasant burn. Perhaps the woman was right. "How's my brother?" she asked, wiping a light froth from her lips. "He is well." "And that cutie you picked up?" "We all are well," said S. "The others are en route to the home of my master. Pierce had an insane plan that just might work. We wanted to make sure you had a plan too." "What plan?" Sugar asked. "Is there anywhere the Underlanders can't emerge?" "I do not know." "So what does it matter?" "Honestly," said S, "I am not sure that it does." Sugar grinned suddenly, peering into S's dark eyes. "I always liked that about you," she said. "No messing around, no pandering lies, just the truth." S smiled back around the stein as she finished her drink. How it warmed the belly. Sugar scanned her empty tavern. She must be missing all the ruckus, but S didn't mind the stillness at all. She'd always found the peace of abandoned places refreshing. Sugar sighed and inspected the ladle she brought out of the kitchen. "All right, well, I guess it's time to give in and head out." S stood and said, "Would you happen to know if Death Grips is still around? Hagrathor wanted to make sure she got the message personally." "That old dog," Sugar laughed. "Well, an unconventional man for an unconventional woman, I suppose." "She has really got him under her thumbs," S said coyly. Sugar hesitated, then gave in to the snicker. "It sounds as if you've been saving that one." S shrugged. "Yes, she's still around," Sugar said. "She better be. We agreed to caravan together." "Oh?" "Yeah, really hit it off after my brother sent her in here for a free pie. A little sweet for a little bitter. Come on, let's go find her." They left the tavern shortly, S floating along at Sugar's side. As expected, Death Grips was working in her stables. Most of her livestock had been harnessed or saddled and arranged into formation. hitched to wagons of various sizes. Her groomsmen bustled about, finalising their preparations. Deathgrips looked up as the other women approached. She raised one eyebrow by a hair's breadth. "Get your mounts killed already?" she asked. "S came to warn us," said Sugar. "About what we already knew?" said the tamer. "Not that it cost me much time," said S. "I came by Agrithor's request." "The bone man," Deathgrips said. "How sweet." S turned to Sugar and asked, "Where will you go to?" "Not many cities up in the flood rush, right?" Sugar answered. "We figured we'd head up that way, set up camp in the wilderness, hope it all blows over." "Or Gorgonbane puts that sicko Underlord out of his misery," Deathgrips added. "We will do our best," said S. "Please take care of yourselves. If you can send a message, do, and I will come and see that you are okay. Be ready for anything, though. Something substantial may be changing in the near future." "Well, that's cryptic," said Sugar. "It will not be if you see it," said S. "Farewell." Flayler's End was still on S's mind, and she wondered how some of the continent's more far-flung lands had fared thus far. Not that their current state spoke reliably to their impending future. Her curiosity demanded that she check. S focused inward, felt the pull towards Conta in the northeast, and collapsed into an endless tunnel.